I said, "You can either serve my husband or get out," and he just smiled, like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear those words. That was the moment everything broke, the moment pride, love, and years of quiet sacrifice collapsed into silence. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people whose happiness you built with your bare hands. The words sting not because they're cruel, but because they reveal the truth you've tried so hard to ignore, that the love you gave became invisible. What happens when the man who gave everything is told he no longer belongs in the home he paid for, when his kindness is mistaken for weakness and his silence for surrender? This isn't just a story about anger or loss. It's about the moment a broken heart chooses dignity over humiliation, and how that single choice can change everything. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Morning light drifted over the Chesapeake, catching the silver tips of the water as gulls wheeled above the docks. The smell of salt and diesel was the same as it had been for most of my working life, a smell that had seeped into my skin and stayed. I'd spent 35 years supervising welders and riggers at the shipyard before I retired, and even now, I still woke up before dawn. Old habits refuse to die, they just slow their pace. Most mornings, I walked along the harbor to feel the wooden planks shift under my boots and to watch the first boats slide out toward the bay. My home sat 3 streets inland, a red brick colonial on Prince George Street. The shutters needed paint, but I liked the way the chipped edges told the truth about time. Inside, the air carried faint notes of varnish and old coffee. My wife Rachel had left her mark on every room before cancer took her 7 years ago. Her favorite rocking chair still faced the front window. Sometimes I'd hear it creak when the wind blew through the screen door, and for a heartbeat, it felt like she was still there, humming the way she used to when she sorted laundry. I lived alone until my daughter Lauren married Brent Sawyer, a slick talker from the marina who sold boats to people richer than he'd ever be. They said they'd stay with me a few months to save for their own place. 3 years later, their boxes still lined my hallway. I told myself it was fine. Family helped family. When I wrote tuition checks for Lauren's teaching degree, I called it love. When I paid for a waterfront wedding and a honeymoon they couldn't afford, I called it pride. When I covered the first mortgage payments so they could get settled, I told myself Rachel would have wanted that. Annapolis isn't a city that forgets who pays whose bills. It's the kind of town where the same waitress pours your coffee for 20 years and remembers the size of your tips. Down at the docks, people asked friendly questions that weren't really questions at all. "Heard the Sawyers are doing well," they'd say, watching for my reaction. I always nodded and smiled, the polite man who didn't want to admit his daughter and her husband were living off his pension. At first, it was small things. Brent began collecting the mail, saying it was easier if he handled the accounts. Lauren corrected me when I cooked, saying I used too much salt. They bought a bigger TV with my credit card by mistake, and I let it slide because I didn't want to start an argument. The balance between generosity and foolishness thinned until it disappeared completely. Still, I told myself that patience was a virtue, that Rachel would have reminded me to keep the peace. I'd sit on the porch at dusk, notebook open, recording expenses out of habit. Each page was a quiet confession: groceries, insurance, utilities, every dollar I spent to keep their comfort intact. The rocking chair beside me stayed empty, its faded cushion like an unspoken judgment. I began to sense that the house no longer belonged to me in spirit. Brent's laughter filled the rooms louder than my footsteps. His beer bottles clinked where Rachel's teacups once rested. Sometimes, as the church bells rang from St. Ishkinan's across the water, I'd feel a tightness in my chest. Not from age, but from recognition. Respect, I'd learned in the yard, could be welded or it could be stripped away one careless comment at a time. Lately, mine had been melting fast. Yet pride made me blind. I wanted to believe kindness still counted for something in a world that seemed to value noise over decency. That evening, I walked down to the pier and watched the sunset burn across the harbor. The tide lapped against the pilings, steady and patient. I caught my reflection in the dark surface. An older man, shoulders still broad but face lined with years of quiet compromise. I told myself storms give warning before they come, that you can see the sky darken in time to lower the sails. As the water rippled and erased my reflection, I realized how wrong I might be. If you're still watching and this moment hit you hard, drop a number 1 in the comments to let me know you're feeling it too. Things are about to shift in ways no one sees coming. Saturday afternoons in Annapolis always carried a slow rhythm, the hum of traffic from Main Street, the far-off sound of boat horns echoing across the bay. I came back from the grocery store balancing 2 brown paper bags against my hip. The sun was hot enough to make the pavement shimmer, and I could feel the handles cutting into my fingers. When I opened the door, the smell of fried food and beer replaced the clean air I'd left behind. Brent was in Rachel's leather recliner, shoes on the armrest, a half-empty bottle of beer sweating on the table beside him. The television blared a baseball game, volume turned up high enough to rattle the windows. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Grab me another cold one while you're up," he said, as if I were a server at a bar. I set the bags on the counter and stared at him for a moment, wondering if I'd misheard. "I just got in," I said evenly. He smirked without turning. "And you walked right past the fridge." Before I could answer, Lauren came out of the kitchen drying her hands on a towel. She looked between us, her eyes cool. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Brent's had a long week." Something about her tone, the sharp edge of command, cut deeper than Brent's arrogance. I'd spent my life giving her everything I could. Tuition, a car, the wedding she dreamed of. I'd been proud of her calm nature, the patience she got from Rachel, but the woman standing before me now didn't sound like my daughter. Brent shifted in the chair, stretching his legs wider. "You either help out around here, or maybe it's time you find somewhere else to stay. We need a house that runs smoothly." I looked from him to Lauren. "Somewhere else to stay," I repeated, letting the words settle between us like dust. Lauren folded her arms. "Dad, what Brent means is that things have changed. We're trying to build our own rhythm here, and you're not," she hesitated, "you're not adjusting." I felt the room shrink around me, every wall pushing inward. The air was heavy, thick with the sound of the television and my own heartbeat. Brent leaned back, satisfied, watching me the way a man watches a tide retreat. "So, that's it," I said quietly. Lauren met my eyes, and for the first time in years, she looked away first. "Either help Brent or you should go." There it was, the ultimatum. No yelling, no dramatic pause, just the blunt finality of it. For a moment, I could almost hear Rachel's voice telling me to stay calm, to take a breath before the storm. I studied my daughter's face, searching for a flicker of hesitation, for the child who used to curl up beside me during summer storms. I found nothing. "All right," I said. Brent grinned. "Good. Then grab that beer." "I'll pack," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. I walked to my room, opened the closet, and reached for the old suitcase I'd used on our honeymoon in Yellowstone. Dust lifted into the sunlight as I pulled it down. I folded clothes methodically, the way Rachel used to, shirts in thirds, socks rolled tight, nothing wasted. I slipped her photo between the pages of my worn expense notebook, added my medication and a small toolkit out of habit. Every zipper, every folded edge felt like a small act of reclamation. From the living room came muffled voices, Lauren's anxious whisper, Brent's sharp reply. But I didn't listen. I lifted the suitcase, feeling its weight settle into my arm, and walked down the hallway. The wheels bumped over the wood floor, each click marking the end of another chapter in my life. When I reached the door, Brent sat up as if to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. Lauren's eyes glistened, though no apology left her lips. I opened the door, and warm evening air met me like freedom long delayed. Outside, the sky over Annapolis blushed pink and gold. I loaded the suitcase into my old Buick, turned the key, and listened to the engine hum, steady and sure. As I pulled onto West Street, the city slid past. The familiar storefronts, the church spire, the reflection of sunlight on the bay. Each block carried a memory, tuition paid, vows financed, promises broken. By the time I reached the motel, the sun had dipped below the waterline. In the quiet of that small room, I set Rachel's photo on the nightstand. The silence felt strange, half lonely, half alive. I realized I wasn't escaping. I was finally leaving port. If this story is striking a chord with you, type number 2 below so I know you're still with me. What happens next will change everything. The hum of the old air conditioner was the first sound I heard that morning. It droned like an exhausted machine trying its best to keep the room cool. The light sneaked through the cheap motel curtains, falling across the small table beside the window. I sat up slowly, my back aching from the stiff mattress, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. There was no more anger left in me, only focus. The coffee from the lobby was bitter, but I drank it anyway, watching the steam rise while I laid out my papers. Years of bank work had trained me to sort chaos into neat columns. The motel table disappeared beneath piles of bills, insurance documents, and bank statements. Every page was proof of how much of my life had been spent keeping my daughter and her husband afloat. Their mortgage, car insurance, grocery bills, all in my name. Every automatic payment had been my quiet way of saying I still mattered to them. Now I saw it differently. I hadn't been generous. I'd been an accomplice to my own erasure. I took out my notebook, the same one I used to track every expense since Rachel passed. My handwriting filled its pages, tidy, exact, as if order could keep the world from falling apart. I drew a line across the newest page and wrote 3 words at the top: end the bleeding. The first call went to First Harbor Bank. I'd been with them for 3 decades, long enough that the customer service rep recognized my name. "Good morning, Mr. Wallace," she said pleasantly. "How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel an automatic payment," I told her, "for the mortgage at 414 Madison Avenue, account ending in 70321. There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Sir, that's been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it?" "Completely sure," I replied. Another pause. "May I ask the reason for the change?" "The homeowners no longer qualify for my assistance." It was the most satisfying sentence I'd spoken in years. I wrote down the confirmation number and hung up. The silence afterward felt almost holy. Then I made the second call, this time to the insurance company. "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I said. "A Ford pickup and a Toyota sedan." The agent hesitated. "You understand that will leave them uninsured?" "I do," I said, "and that's exactly how it should be." By the time I finished with the credit card companies, my hand cramped from writing reference numbers, but my mind was clear. Lauren had been an authorized user on 3 accounts. I could still hear her teenage voice saying, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll pay it back." She never did. Now her access was gone with a single signature. The phone felt lighter each time I hung up. Every click was a release, every confirmation number a small act of freedom. When the last call ended, I stood at the window and looked out across the motel parking lot. A couple loaded suitcases into their SUV, laughing about breakfast plans. It struck me how ordinary their happiness looked, and how long I'd mistaken obligation for love. After lunch, I walked through downtown Annapolis. The harbor was alive with voices. Children feeding gulls, couples walking hand in hand, the smell of sea salt mixing with coffee and diesel. I'd lived in this city for nearly 40 years, but it felt new now. I wasn't a father funding someone else's comfort anymore. I was a man rebuilding his boundaries. I stopped in front of St. Anne's Church, where Rachel and I had once lit candles for friends in trouble. I thought about what she'd say if she were here. Probably something gentle but firm. Mercy isn't weakness, Frank, but mercy has limits. Back at the motel, I sat down again and reviewed the list of numbers, confirmations, and cancellations. Everything was tidy. Everything accounted for. For the first time, I owed no one. I leaned back, letting the hum of the air conditioner fill the silence. My phone sat on the table, still and quiet. I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. By tomorrow, the mortgage payment would bounce, the insurance policies would lapse, the cards would decline. Then the calls would start. Confusion first, then anger, then panic. I didn't plan to answer. I closed my notebook, placed Rachel's photo on top, and whispered, "I'm finally doing what you wanted, love, teaching them the hard way." The neon motel sign flickered red through the thin curtains, casting my reflection in the glass. For the first time in a long while, the man looking back at me wasn't tired, he was awake. If you've made it this far and can feel the tension building, leave a number 3 in the comments. You're not ready for what's about to unfold. 3 days passed before the quiet began to break. The motel had settled into a rhythm I'd grown to appreciate. The hum of passing cars, the smell of coffee drifting in from the lobby, the muted buzz of the television in the next room. Every morning, I woke early, drank coffee that tasted faintly like burnt rubber, and read the newspaper cover to cover. The silence felt deliberate, like the world holding its breath. That Wednesday afternoon, the first crack appeared. My phone buzzed once across the table. Lauren's name lit up the screen. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a voicemail notification appeared. I let it play on speaker, the voice of a woman trying to sound calm while panic scratched beneath every syllable. "Dad, it's me. I think there's been some kind of banking error. The mortgage payment didn't go through, and the bank said your account isn't listed anymore. Can you call me back?" Her tone was polite, careful, like someone negotiating with a stranger. I didn't call back. I simply whispered to myself, "It's beginning," and wrote the date and time in my notebook. By the next morning, there were 6 missed calls. That evening, 12. The messages shifted in tone, confusion giving way to irritation. "Dad, what's going on? We can't reach the bank." "Did you cancel something by mistake? The insurance company says we're not covered anymore. Please call me back." "This isn't funny." Brent's number started appearing after that. His messages were short, sharp, and angry. "You better fix this, old man. You've made a mess. The mortgage company's calling every hour. What did you do?" I played each message once, wrote down the timestamp, then deleted it. The sound of their desperation was strangely rhythmic, like the ocean tide, loud, retreating, returning again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small when my phone rang. I felt steady. On Friday morning, I sat at the diner across from the harbor, sipping black coffee. The smell of bacon and salt air filled the room. An old friend, Bob Harrison, spotted me from the counter. "Frank Wallace," he said, grinning as he walked over. "Didn't expect to see you out this way. How's retirement treating you?" "Peaceful," I said with a small smile. Bob chuckled. "You're better off than your son-in-law, that's for sure. Saw him at the bank yesterday. Looked ready to strangle someone. Guess his mortgage payment bounced. Whole lobby heard him shouting about how the system was wrong." I stirred my coffee slowly. "That so?" "Yeah. He was talking about some mix-up with payments. Folks at the counter didn't look convinced." Bob lowered his voice. "You take care of yourself, Frank." He looked desperate. When he left, I finished my coffee in silence. Outside, the wind from the bay was sharp, clean. I stood there for a moment, letting the chill cut through the last bits of guilt I'd been holding on to. That evening, the calls turned frantic. Lauren's messages came in broken bursts, her voice trembling. "Dad, please. They're saying foreclosure. I don't understand why you do this to us." Then Brent's voice followed, angry, cracking under pressure. "You think this is some kind of lesson? You're ruining our lives." Each word landed like rain against a closed window, loud but powerless to enter. I turned off the sound, leaving the phone to blink silently in the corner. I opened my notebook instead, writing one clean sentence across the page. Lesson 1, they've noticed. Guilt tried to rise again, the memory of Lauren as a little girl flashing through my mind, barefoot in the yard, running through puddles after a summer storm. But then her voice from that night replayed in my head. Serve him or leave. The pain hardened into resolve. Outside, the motel's neon sign flickered against the damp pavement. I sat by the window, watching reflections of passing headlights sweep across the glass. Somewhere downtown, the people who'd depended on me for 5 years were learning what it meant to stand alone. For the first time in decades, I didn't need to fix anyone's mistakes. I didn't need to explain myself. I simply needed to wait. They'd built their comfort on my silence, I murmured. Now silence is all they'll get. I closed the notebook, placed Rachel's photo on top, and let the night settle in. The phone was still flashing with missed calls, a silent orchestra of consequences playing just for me. I smiled faintly and turned off the lamp. They'd expected me to crumble. They forgot I'd spent a lifetime learning how to rebuild. If this part made you stop and think, drop a number 4 down below to show you're still here. What follows will test every emotion you've felt so far. A week passed before they came. The morning light slipped through the thin motel curtains, painting the walls with pale gold. I sat at the small table, spreading my notes across the surface like a commander reviewing his strategy. Confirmation numbers, receipts, copies of canceled transfers. The photo of Rachel leaned against my coffee cup, her smile steady, as if she knew what was coming. I'd been waiting for this moment since the day I walked out of that house. The knock came at 9:07 a.m. 3 sharp hits followed by silence. I already knew who it was. Through the peephole, I saw Lauren's pale face and Brent's bulk looming behind her. His jaw was tight, his posture tense, the body language of a man who had lost control and needed someone to blame. I opened the door but didn't step aside. The smell of his cologne hit first. Strong, synthetic, too familiar. Lauren's eyes were red-rimmed. "Dad," she said softly, "we need to talk." "About what?" I asked. Brent pushed forward. "You know damn well what about." His voice carried that false authority of a man used to shouting his way through weakness. "You're trying to ruin us over one argument. You canceled the mortgage, the insurance, everything. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, "that I stopped paying for things that aren't my responsibility." He scoffed. "Your responsibility? We live there. That's our home." "Actually," I said quietly, "it's mine." The words hung between us, sharp and clean. I pulled a folded document from my table, the property deed. My name's still on it, always has been. My signature on the loan, my payments keeping it afloat. You two have been living as guests. Lauren's hand went to her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not..." I handed her the paper. "Check the signatures. You'll see only one name that matters." Brent's face reddened. "You're lying. You said this was our house when we moved in. I said you could make it a home," I corrected. "But there's a difference between generosity and ownership." Lauren's voice cracked. "Dad, please. We just need time to fix this. You can't leave us like this." I looked at her, really looked at her. The tiredness under her eyes, the tremble in her voice. For a heartbeat, I almost softened. But then I remembered the way she'd stood beside him that day, her voice cold and certain. Either serve him or leave. "I already gave you time," I said. 5 years of it. Brent stepped closer, his breath sour with anger. "You're unbelievable. You're throwing your own daughter out just to prove a point?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm teaching her one." He barked a laugh. "You think this is teaching?" "It's cruelty. Cruelty," I said, meeting his glare, "is giving a man everything he wants until he forgets gratitude." For a moment, the room went still. Brent's jaw worked as if he wanted to hit something, but couldn't decide whether it should be me or the truth. Lauren's tears came freely now, streaking her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "please don't do this." "I already did," I said quietly, "the moment you gave me that choice." Brent's voice rose again, rough and desperate. "You'll regret this, old man." I straightened my shoulders. "I already did. That's why I stopped." He froze. The silence afterward was heavier than shouting. Lauren tugged on his sleeve, urging him back. "Let's go," she said, her voice small. He hesitated, glaring one last time before turning away. The sound of their footsteps down the corridor was uneven. Hers hurried, his stomping. The door of their car slammed, the engine roared, and then they were gone. For a while I stood in the doorway, listening to the echo of departure. The air outside was sharp with the scent of the bay. Somewhere, gulls screamed over the water. Inside, the motel was still and warm. I sat back down, took up my notebook, and wrote a single line beneath the others. Lesson 2. They've seen the truth. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. Inevitable, heavy, and right. Justice rarely feels like triumph. It feels like balance returning. The sun was sinking behind the marina when I whispered to Rachel's photo. They thought I'd retired from fighting. Turns out, I just changed the battlefield. The morning after the confrontation felt strangely quiet. The air in the motel room was cool and still, heavy with the smell of cheap coffee and detergent. I sat at the table, staring at the documents I'd neatly stacked the night before. Deeds, receipts, mortgage statements, the proof of a lifetime spent giving, and of the moment I finally stopped. Outside, the seagulls screeched above the harbor, but inside, everything was calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. As I reviewed each paper, the details told a story more damning than emotion ever could. Every check, every transfer, every payment bore my signature. Their house existed because I'd built it, brick by dollar, nail by sacrifice. And yet, they'd told me to serve or leave. That phrase had become a line carved into my mind. I flipped through my notebook and stopped at a scribbled note from last week. Bob Harrison's words at the diner. He looked desperate, Frank. Real desperate. Brent's behavior had gone beyond entitlement. It smelled of panic. I'd seen that look before, years ago at the bank, in men who tried to hide their financial disasters under charm or threats. I picked up the phone and dialed an old number, Detective Jim Morrison. We'd served on the same church building committee once, back when decency still meant something in town. Frank Wallace, he said, surprised but friendly. Been a while. What brings you to my side of things? Information, I said. About my son-in-law, Brent Collins. There was a pause, followed by the rustle of paper. Collins? Yeah, I've heard that name. Why? I need to know if he's in trouble. Jim exhaled slowly. Between you and me, Frank, the man's been poking at the edges of the law. Gambling debts, fake documentation, nothing that's stuck yet, but enough smoke to promise fire. I felt a chill spread through my chest. Fake documentation? He tried to pass off your house as his property for a loan a few months back. We caught it before anything went through. I've got the file. The confirmation didn't shock me. It only settled what I'd already begun to suspect. Thanks, Jim, I said. You might have just given me the push I needed. After hanging up, I sat for a long time, the phone silent beside me. The truth had finally shifted the ground beneath my feet. This wasn't just family betrayal, it was attempted theft. For years, I'd blamed myself for being too soft, too generous, but the man I'd trusted to care for my daughter had been planning to steal from me while sitting in my chair. By noon, I was standing inside the Anne Arundel County Courthouse. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, processed my paperwork with the calm detachment of someone who'd seen too many broken families. Eviction filing for 414 Madison Avenue? She asked. Yes. Reason? I looked her in the eye. Violation of trust and mutual respect. She paused, then nodded. That's as good a reason as any, Mr. Wallace. The stamp came down with a satisfying thud. Official, irreversible. Back at the motel, I placed the stamped copies on the table beside Rachel's photo. The weight of them felt like justice. Heavy, but honest. I could almost hear her voice. Fair doesn't mean painless, Frank. That evening, my phone rang again. Lauren's number. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad? Her voice was raw, uncertain. Brent says you filed something at the courthouse. Is it true? It is, I said quietly. You asked me to leave, so I did. Now I'm making it legal. Her breath hitched. Please, Dad, don't do this. We can fix it. Brent's just under pressure. Things have been hard. They're hard for everyone, I said, but we all face the results of our choices. This isn't punishment, Lauren. It's a boundary. One I should have drawn a long time ago. She was crying now, trying to hold her voice steady. You're really cutting us off? I'm freeing us, I replied. All of us. Silence filled the line, and for a moment I could almost see her, standing in that kitchen, surrounded by the comfort she'd mistaken for stability. Then she whispered, I don't even know who you are anymore. You'll find out, I said softly, when you meet me as an equal. I ended the call before the tears could return. Later that night, as I turned off the lights, I noticed a car idling in the parking lot, a dark sedan, headlights off. A man stood by the hood, smoking, watching. I didn't move toward the window. I simply noted the time in my notebook. Lesson 3. Boundaries protect peace. Then I closed the notebook and set it beside Rachel's picture. They'd drawn the first line when they told me to leave. Now I was redrawing it, with ink that couldn't be erased. If you're still here and can sense how deep this truth cuts, comment number 5 to stay with me. What's coming will shake everything to its core. A week later, the call from the courthouse came just after sunrise. The clerk's voice was polite but distant, the way people sound when they deliver something final. Mr. Wallace, I'm calling to confirm that the eviction notice has been served. It's been posted on the front door of 414 Madison Avenue. I thanked her and hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the cracked motel ceiling as the meaning of her words sank in. I imagined the white paper flapping in the breeze, taped to the front door I once painted myself. It wasn't revenge, it was symmetry. After years of silence, the balance was finally being restored. Down at the diner, the regulars were already talking. Gossip in a small town spreads faster than truth. Bob Harrison slid into the booth across from me, coffee in hand. So, he said with a knowing grin, the story's out. People finally know who's been paying for what. I didn't answer right away. Outside, gulls circled the harbor, their cries sharp against the morning light. I didn't want anyone to know, I said quietly. I just wanted it to end. Bob nodded. Yeah, well, sometimes endings make their own noise. That afternoon, I found Lauren waiting by my car outside the motel. She looked smaller somehow, her hair pulled back, her clothes plain, her face pale and drawn. The last time I'd seen her, she'd stood behind Brent like a wall of quiet support. Now, she looked like someone trying to hold her own pieces together. Dad, she said softly, can we talk? I nodded and leaned against the car door. She took a deep breath. The bank's calling every day. They say the house isn't ours anymore. Brent's been drinking, yelling. He's not the same. Please, can't you stop this? I already did stop it, I said. 5 years ago, I should have. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand. This is destroying us. I met her gaze. It's not destroying you, Lauren. It's showing you what was already broken. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Do you even love me anymore? I hesitated, the question hitting deeper than I expected. Always, I said finally. But love isn't supposed to mean blindness. Her chin quivered, and for a second I saw the little girl who used to hold my hand walking to church. Please, Dad, just give us one more chance. I gave you every chance that mattered, I said gently. This isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. You told me to leave, remember? Now you're learning what leaving really feels like. She wiped her tears, nodded once, and walked away without another word. Watching her go felt like watching a chapter of my life close in real time. That night, as the harbor lights shimmered across the water, I opened my notebook and wrote, Lesson 4, Justice Demands Solitude. The words sat heavy on the page. I thought of Rachel, how she'd once said that fairness doesn't always mean comfort. She'd been right again. 2 days later, I saw my name online for the first time. A local paper had published an article, Retired Banker Evicts Daughter's Family in Property Dispute. The piece twisted the truth, painting Brent as the victim and me as a bitter old man. At the diner, people whispered behind their coffee cups. I just smiled and kept reading. They've turned to noise because they've run out of truth, I murmured. That afternoon, Detective Morrison showed up at the motel. He dropped a manila folder on the table. Thought you should know. Your son-in-law's little media stunt got our attention. We reopened his case. Turns out he's under investigation again. Fraud, falsified applications, the works. I looked up from the folder. So, he's doing this to himself now? Morrison nodded. That's usually how it goes. When he left, I sat by the window, the orange glow of sunset spilling across the harbor. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. The world had turned itself right side up again. Not because I forced it, but because I stopped standing in its way. That evening, I walked to St. Anne's Church and lit a candle for Rachel. We did it your way, I whispered. Slow, fair, and final. I didn't pray for revenge. I prayed for understanding, for her peace, for Lauren's growth, for my own forgiveness. Back at the motel, I closed my notebook and locked it in my suitcase. Some stories needed to end before new ones could begin. When my phone rang again later that night, the number was unfamiliar. I let it ring. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to echo. 3 weeks had passed since the article came out. The motel room, once a symbol of exile, had grown familiar. The light fell softer through the curtains now, and the air didn't feel heavy anymore. I kept the place neat, bed made, table cleared, notebook always in the same spot by the window. My mornings had become simple again. Coffee, a slow walk along the harbor, and 10 minutes of quiet writing. I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. Silence had stopped being punishment. It had become peace. News traveled quickly in Annapolis. I didn't look for it, but it found me through casual remarks and small-town chatter. Bob Harrison told me one morning at the diner, "Your son-in-law's out of work." The bank cut him loose. He said it with the blunt sympathy only an old friend can manage. A word is, the state's investigating his name again. Seems you were right all along. I nodded, stirring my coffee. Being right doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. He tilted his head. It never does. Later that week, a letter arrived at the motel, tucked neatly into an envelope with my name written in Lauren's handwriting. I sat on the bed and read it twice. Her words were heavy with regret. She said she was sorry for how things unfolded, that she didn't realize how much I'd carried for her, that she missed Mom's voice. But between the lines, I could still sense distance. Regret without understanding is just nostalgia. I folded the letter and slipped it into my notebook, between the pages where I kept the mortgage receipts. I didn't write back. Not yet. A few days later, I started volunteering at the community center downtown. They needed someone to teach financial basics to retirees who'd been burned by bad investments or careless lending. It was simple work, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. One afternoon, an older man named Clyde stayed after class. "You talk like a man who's learned the hard way," he said with a crooked smile. "I suppose that's the only way most of us learn," I told him. The walk back to the motel that evening was quiet, the sunset turning the harbor gold. I realized I didn't hate Brent anymore. Anger had burned out of me, leaving only something steady and clear. I didn't want them to suffer. I wanted them to see. There's a difference. Detective Morrison came by the center a week later, still in his worn leather jacket, the smell of coffee clinging to him. "Thought you'd like an update," he said, handing me a folder. "The fraud case is moving forward. Your son-in-law's got a list of problems longer than his resume." I closed the folder without looking. "I'm done chasing justice, Jim. It'll find him on its own." He nodded. "You've earned your peace, Frank." Maybe I had. That night, I walked by the waterfront again, the sound of waves slapping against the docks. Rachel's memory felt close, but not heavy anymore. I whispered, "You were right, love. Fair doesn't mean kind, but it can still be clean." A week later, fate gave me something I hadn't expected. I saw Lauren outside the grocery store. She was thinner, older somehow, carrying a small paper bag with milk and bread. When our eyes met, she froze. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart." There was an awkward silence before she spoke again. I hated you for a while. I thought you did this to hurt us, but now I get it. I think I do. I nodded slowly. Understanding is a start. Her voice broke. Brent's gone. He left after the investigation started. I'm just trying to figure things out. You will, I said. The hard lessons last the longest. She smiled faintly. Can we talk again sometime? When the past feels lighter, I said. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked away. I watched her until she disappeared into traffic. That night, back at the motel, I wrote one final note in my notebook. Lesson 5, peace follows truth. Then I closed it, slid it into my suitcase, and locked it away. A few weeks later, I moved into a small house by the bay, a one-story place with peeling paint and a wide porch. I planted a few flowers in the front yard, something Rachel always wanted. The soil was soft, forgiving. As I watered the seedlings, the tide rolled in and out beyond the fence, steady and eternal. I whispered, "Justice may set things right, but forgiveness lets them rest." And for the first time in years, I finally felt home. If you're still watching and this moment makes your heart ache, drop a number 6 below to let me know you're with me. What happens next will stay with you long after the story ends. The mornings by the bay had a rhythm all their own. The waves came and went like breath, soft and certain, washing the world clean before the day began. From my small porch, I could see the sunlight scatter across the water, gulls rising like scraps of paper in the wind. It had been months since I left the motel, but the quiet still surprised me sometimes, the kind of peace that doesn't ask questions. My days were simple now. I woke early, brewed coffee, tended to the small garden in the front yard, and walked along the shoreline until the sun was high. The flowers Rachel loved, lilies and small marigolds, were beginning to bloom, their colors bright against the pale fence. Inside, my house smelled faintly of salt and cedar, a reminder that I was exactly where I needed to be. At the community center, they'd started calling me Mr. Wallace the banker. I taught twice a week, helping retirees make sense of budgets, savings, and the kind of paperwork that used to drown me in my old life. I never mentioned my own story, but sometimes, when someone talked about being taken advantage of by family or friends, I'd nod a little too knowingly. They didn't need the details. The lesson was universal. In the afternoons, I came home to a quiet house that didn't echo anymore. The loneliness that used to feel like punishment now felt like space, a space I'd earned. One warm Thursday, I found an envelope in the mail, forwarded from the motel. The handwriting stopped me cold before I even opened it. Lauren's. I sat on the porch and unfolded the letter slowly. "Dad," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever want to hear from me again, but I wanted you to know I'm okay. I have a part-time job at a bookstore. I'm learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, finally. Brent's gone. He left a few weeks after the investigation started. I thought losing everything would destroy me, but maybe it's saving me. I see now that you weren't trying to punish me. You were trying to free me. I just wasn't ready to see it." The letter ended simply, "I love you, and I hope someday we can talk again." I folded it carefully and placed it beside Rachel's photo. For a long time, I just sat there, the sound of the waves filling the silence. Then I whispered, "She got there, love." She finally got there. That evening, I gathered the last pieces of the past, the eviction notice, old mortgage papers, and the thick envelope of court documents, and burned them in a small metal bin behind the house. The papers curled and blackened, drifting upward in pale threads of smoke. The wind carried the ashes out over the water until they disappeared. I kept only 3 things: my notebook, Rachel's picture, and Lauren's letters. The rest belonged to the fire. Bob Harrison stopped by the next day with 2 fishing rods and a 6-pack. We sat on the porch as the tide rolled in, the sky streaked with orange and rose. "You know," he said, cracking open a can, "folks around town used to whisper about you. Now they talk about how you did what no one else had the guts to do." I smiled. I didn't do it to prove anything. I just needed to remember who I was. He nodded, staring out at the water. "That's enough." When the sun dipped low, I thought about Rachel, about mercy, and what it really meant. Mercy wasn't about letting people get away with what they'd done. It was about letting yourself stop carrying it. And that, I realized, was the last part of justice, the quiet part no one writes about. The next morning, I accepted a part-time position at the center as a permanent mentor. It wasn't much, but it gave my days purpose. The younger volunteers treated me with respect, and sometimes, when the light hit the bay just right, I felt Rachel's pride in the air. That Sunday, I went to St. Anne's Church for the first time in years. I lit 3 candles, one for Rachel, one for Lauren, and one for myself. Past, present, and renewal. The flames flickered softly, steady against the draft. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote one last line. Lesson 6. Some endings aren't sad, they're just finished. I closed the cover, placed it beside Rachel's picture, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the smell of salt and earth, and somewhere in the distance the tide was turning. The storm was over, not because it passed, but because I'd stopped standing in the rain. The mornings were quieter now, almost reverent. From my porch I could see the bay waking under a soft veil of mist. The water, once restless and gray, had turned calm, like a mirror that had finally learned to reflect rather than resist. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee and breathed in the salt air. There was no sense of victory in me, no triumph, only a gentle awareness that peace, when it finally comes, doesn't arrive with noise. It settles in like dawn, slow and certain. Time, I had learned, doesn't heal wounds. It teaches you how to live with them until they no longer define you. I still thought of Lauren sometimes, the sound of her laughter when she was little, the way she used to race into my arms when storms frightened her. The memories no longer hurt. They were lessons carved into the quiet corners of my mind. I'd spent years mistaking giving for love, patience for peace, and silence for strength. It took losing everything to realize that dignity is a form of love too, love for oneself. As the sun lifted higher, I watched a few fishermen casting lines near the docks. They reminded me of life itself, throwing out hope, waiting in faith, never certain what they'd pull in. Maybe that's what being a father was like, casting kindness into the world, not for reward, but because that's all you knew to do. I thought of all the parents who'd given too much, who'd been drained by the people they loved most. The truth is simple and cruel. Love without respect becomes servitude, and no heart can survive that for long. Family, I realized, isn't made of shared blood. It's made of shared values, respect, gratitude, kindness. You can lose your home, your fortune, even your name, but if you still carry those things inside you, you've lost nothing that truly matters. For years, I had believed setting boundaries meant turning my back on family. But it wasn't rejection, it was rescue. We teach others how to treat us by what we allow. And when we stop allowing disrespect, we don't destroy love, we redefine it. Walking away was never an act of bitterness. It was the only way to protect what remained of me. One afternoon, I walked down the trail to the veterans' housing complex that now stood where my old house once did. The sound of children laughing filled the air, bright and untarnished. The building had been painted white and blue, the playground full of motion and joy. Watching those families, I realized something profound. My home had finally found its purpose. It wasn't a symbol of loss anymore. It was a place of beginning. That night, I returned home and sat by the window as the sky deepened into indigo. Rachel's photograph rested beside a flickering candle, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel her absence. I felt her presence, quiet, approving, eternal. She'd always believed in kindness, but she'd also believed in strength. It took me a lifetime to understand both could live in the same heart. I thought of forgiveness, not as a word, but as a process. Forgiveness isn't permission for what happened. It's permission to stop reliving it. It's the decision to close a door, not out of anger, but because you finally stepped outside. I forgave Lauren. I forgave Brent. And finally, I forgave myself for staying silent too long, for mistaking endurance for love. When the sun rose the next morning, I walked to the shoreline with a smooth stone in my hand. I threw it gently, watching it skip across the surface before sinking into the depths. Ripples spread in perfect circles, reaching farther than I could see. That's what truth does. It spreads quietly, leaving echoes long after you're gone. Back on the porch, I opened my notebook for the last time. The pages were nearly full, the handwriting uneven in places but honest. I wrote, "Peace isn't what you find after the storm. It's what you build in its place." I closed the notebook, set it beside Rachel's photo, and leaned back as the wind picked up from the bay. The waves whispered against the rocks, soft and rhythmic, like the world breathing again. In the end, every storm ends the same way, not with thunder, but with silence. And in that silence, we remember who we are. There are moments in life when silence becomes the truest form of understanding, not the silence of emptiness or defeat, but the stillness that follows truth. A silence that hums with clarity, forgiveness, and the kind of peace that can't be purchased or granted by others. It's the quiet that comes when the heart has finally stopped negotiating with pain. We spend so many years believing that love is measured by what we give away, by how much we can endure, or by how deeply we can bend ourselves to keep the peace. But true love, the kind that survives the storms of betrayal, loss, and pride, isn't about surrendering ourselves. It's about finding the strength to stand tall, even when everything we thought we needed has been stripped away. There is a turning point in every human life when endurance must give way to dignity. That moment is never loud. It comes softly, like light returning to a room that's been dark for too long. We learn, often through heartbreak, that boundaries are not walls. They are the quiet lines that protect our worth from being eroded by others' demands. Saying enough is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of preservation. It is how we remind ourselves that self-respect is not a privilege to be earned, but a birthright that must never be traded for acceptance. The hardest lesson is that peace doesn't come when everything is fixed. It comes when we accept that not everything will be. Life rarely offers closure wrapped in neat explanations. More often, it gives us pieces, broken, uneven, and imperfect, and asks us to find beauty in assembling them into something whole. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry memory without letting it poison the present. The ache never fully leaves. It simply softens until it becomes part of the rhythm of your days, like a song that once broke you, but now just reminds you that you survived. Forgiveness, too, changes meaning as we grow. We begin by thinking forgiveness is something we grant to others, a gift extended toward the people who hurt us. But the real forgiveness happens within. It's the moment you release yourself from the story of the wound. It's realizing that you don't need apologies to move forward. You just need to stop living inside the memory of what should have been. To forgive is not to erase. It's to let the past exist without chaining it to your future. And what of love? Love, at its purest, is not dependency or debt. It is understanding. It is the courage to let go of control and still wish others well. It is the willingness to be alone rather than be diminished. Real love does not demand that you lose yourself to prove devotion. It invites you to grow into your best self beside another soul who recognizes your worth. When that recognition fades, love must take a new shape, one that protects rather than pleads. Life, in its quiet wisdom, will test us with loss. It will take what we cherish to remind us of what cannot be taken. The home, the family, the familiar, all these things can be stripped away, but the essence of who we are remains untouched if we've learned to anchor it in truth. The world may call it resilience. The soul simply calls it remembering. Remembering that we are whole not because others see us that way, but because we have seen ourselves clearly and chosen to stand in that light. At some point, we realize that the real measure of a person is not how many storms they have survived, but how they've rebuilt afterward, how gently they can hold life again without fear of breaking it, how quietly they can love without needing it to look like it once did. Peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the mastery of stillness within it. It is the decision to build something beautiful out of what remains. When we finally reach that stillness, we understand the meaning of grace. Grace is not weakness. It is not resignation. It is the steady heartbeat of the soul that has seen darkness and still chooses light. It is the strength to forgive without forgetting, to love without attachment, to walk away without bitterness. It is knowing that endings are not punishments, they are passages. In the end, every journey leads us back to ourselves. The noise fades, the pride dissolves, and what's left is a simple truth. Peace is not given, it is chosen. It grows quietly in the soil of self-respect, watered by wisdom and tended by time. And when it finally blooms, it does not need to announce itself. It just stands there, steady and alive, whispering to anyone who listens, "You made it through. You are enough. You always were." These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.